pretty good command of your property, so that was good. Number 1 is the multiplicative inverse. We will remember that anytime we have a fraction, I don't mean a fraction, I mean a reciprocal. Anytime we have a reciprocal or an opposite, it's an inverse property. Okay? So additive, or excuse me, multiplicative inverse for number 1. Number 2, what changed? The order of the multiplication. So number 2 is commutative of multiplication. 3 is the additive identity. When you add 0, you get the identical thing back again. And D is commutative of addition. The order of the addition is changed, not the grouping. All right, are we good on those? In 6 days, we have a test. We can handle a bad quiz score, but we don't want to be getting, 50% on a test, right? So let's ask these questions if we have them. All right, number 2, or A. This is different than this. This literally says -1 times 2 to the 4th. That 4 has nothing to do with that negative sign. So what's the answer? -16. Now this would be +16. This is -16. The exponent only goes with what it is attached to. The exponent does not go with the negative. B. What does that negative exponent do? So we have 1 over -3x squared. That means -3x times -3x, the exponent's on the whole thing, so that would be 1 over 9x squared. Anybody have a question about that? Okay, then we've got and I'm going to go ahead and move this y cubed down because it has a negative exponent, so I'm just going to move it to the bottom. This exponent is hooked to that whole parentheses, so it is going to square everything. So that's a 4, an x to the 10th, a y to the 14th, and then my y cubed there. So far, so good? 30 over 4, that reduces to 15 halves. Now, what happens to the x's? Well, I got 4 of them on the top and 10 of them on the bottom, so that puts 6 on the bottom. And I already have 17 of those on the bottom. There's the answer to that one. Any question about that? Now, you can solve this in lots of different ways, but I'm going to go ahead and do it the way we talked about doing it before, which is an awesome way to do the problem, not the only way. Personally, I think it's the best way, but that's debatable. The common denominator all the way across would be 30. So I'm going to multiply everything by 30. 5 goes into there 6 times. 3 goes into there 10 times. And 2 goes into there 15 times. Any question about step 1? So 12x plus 10x minus 70 equals 15. So 22x equals 85, and x equals 85 22s. Any question about that? If you're going to complete the square on this equation, you got to take care of something first. What has to be addressed if we're going to complete the square?
Get rid of the 2.
Yeah, we got to get rid of the 2. So we're going to divide everything by 2, and then we'll be ready to complete All right, so if we divide everything by 2, if I divide everything by 2, I will have x squared minus 4x plus 3 halves. Now I'm going to move this to the other side, right? And then I'm going to be ready to complete the square. What am I going to add to both sides to do that? Half of 4 is 2 squared is 4. So that's the answer. You didn't have to do anything else. You just had to figure out what to add. All right, first side okay with everybody? We need to be confident that we won't make these same mistakes over again. All right, back side. Write the equation of the line. You guys, what do lines look like? What does the equation of a line look like? Y equals mx plus b. So whatever you put in the answer blank should look like that. It should not have any squares in it and all that funky weird stuff. Here, Emma. We're on the back side now. We just finished the file. So what have we got? We've got 2 points. You need the slope. Okay? Now, the next person that messes up slope, I don't know what I'm going to do. Somehow public will humiliate you. We cannot be messing up slope. Here, how do we find slope? Sarah, here. How do you find slope? 5 minus 1 over 6 minus negative 2. 5 minus 1 is 4. 6 minus negative 2 is 8. Our slope is 1/2. Pick a point, doesn't matter which one. I'll do point slope. You don't have to. You can if you want. So y minus 5 equals 1/2 x minus 6. Y equals 1/2 x minus 3 plus 5. So y equals 1/2 x plus 2. There's your answer. Are you okay with that? A quadratic equation is factorable. What is a possible discriminant value? Well, there are billions of them. What kind of number do you have to have if your discriminant is if your equation is factorable?
Perfect square.
Some perfect square. So 16, 4, 1, 0, 36, 64, any perfect square. Think about the quadratic formula. If what's under the radical, the discriminant, is a perfect square, then will your answer have any radicals in them? No. That's how you know it's factorable. There's no radical there. Given these 2 points, write the equation of the circle. Now, this is what the equation of a line looks like. What does the equation of a circle look like? X parentheses squared, y parentheses squared equals r squared. That's what I'm shooting for. And all I've been given is the diameter. Have we done this problem before? Yeah. So, I need the center, because the center is what goes here, right? In the equation. How am I going to find the center? Oh, not the distance formula, not for the center. I'll use the distance formula for the radius, but for the center I need midpoint. So 2 plus negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 1. 6 plus 8 divided by 2 is 7. Now, kids, that's what goes in here. Some of you put these in there. That is what goes in here. So x plus 1, y minus 7. This, or this, would be the radius, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and find the radius using my distance formula. -1 minus -4 squared, and 7 minus 8 squared. So that's 3/9 plus 1. My radius is √10, which means what goes here? Plane 10. Anybody have a question about that?
Okay, so the answer for the second one was, okay, √10. Okay, never mind. I see what you mean.
Okay? Solve. What kind of equation is this?
Quadratic.
Quadratic. What options do we have?
Factor.
Well, you can try to factor it. You could complete the square, or you could use the quadratic formula. Now, no way am I going to complete the square on this, because what would I have to do to get started? Divide by 3. So if I have a choice, I'm not picking that, because I'm going to fill this thing up with fractions. Does it factor? Well, some of you thought it did. So what I need for you to do is FOIL out your factors and see if they do indeed give you this, because they don't. This problem doesn't factor. How am I so sure? B squared minus 4 times A times C. That's 12 times 5, that's 60. What's my discriminant? Is 124 a perfect square? Somebody thought it was 12. The 144 is 12 squared, right? This is not a perfect square. So x equals -b plus or minus the square root of 124 divided by 2a. Is that okay so far? Now, 124 probably does break down. It's not a perfect square, but it probably breaks down. It's 4 times 31. So would you agree it's 2√31 when I break it down? Now see this triangle of numbers right here? They are all divisible by 2. So that would be, finally, 4 plus or minus √31 divided by 3. Here's your answer. Great. All right. And then last but not least, and you had a few of these in last night's homework too. It does not matter to me how you do this problem. But if you missed it, you need to think twice about, what your strategy was. This says literally, the distance between x and 4 is less than 3. So here is 4. Where is x so that the distance is 3? Well, wouldn't x have to be out here at 7 or back here at 1? That's where the distance is exactly 3. Where would it be less than 3? In between. So in interval your notation, that's your answer. All right, back page. Any questions about the back page? Yes?
When you're doing the quadratic formula and you have, like, with the, it'd be like 4 plus or minus, like, √11 was your original root, divided by 2, could you still simplify the formula?
You cannot simplify unless you can do the entire, all 3 numbers have to be simplified.
Even if there's not a number in it?
All 3 numbers have to be simplified. And there's always a number there. It might be a 1, but you've got to reduce all those so you can't. Rachel?
Number 7, why is it x plus 1?
Because our center was at -1, and it's always the opposite. The midpoint was at -1, so that means x plus 1. And then y was at 7, so that's y minus 7. Anything else?
What was this out of?
24. All right. How many of you feel like you should have done better than you did? That's what I was afraid of. So here's the moral of the story. Tonight's homework is going to be the review sheet that I gave you the other day. Remember a while back, day of fire drill, I handed out that review sheet. You might consider taking a picture of that or making an extra copy of it so that you can work through those problems twice. Okay? Because I feel like maybe you went through the practice quizzes too fast or something. I mean, some people did great, but there were too many of you that just didn't get a very good score on this quiz, and you knew exactly what I was going to ask you. So I just feel like you didn't practice enough, maybe. Or maybe you're just overwhelmed with too much schoolwork. I don't know, but you really need to practice.
Did we get bonus points for the 6 plus 5?
Yes, they've already been added in. If you think I didn't add them, the number wrong is doubled, subtracted from 24, and then I should have added 2 in. If I did not, then I would rather do that. But I think I did. I meant to. Okay. Now, yesterday, we were solving inequalities. So, let's take a look at last night's homework and see how we did with that. Did anybody have a question about last night's homework? Robert?
For B on 34, what does it mean when you do like more than?
Let me see. Let's do 34. Because projectile motion is probably going to show up on our test, so let's make sure we can do it. We're just going to do problem 34, and then Robert will get your question when we get there. A projectile is launched straight up from ground level with an initial velocity of 272 feet per second. All right, what's our equation going to look like? You need to know this. S equals negative 16t squared. That never changes as long as we're in feet. If we're in meters, there's a different coefficient. But if we're in feet, which I'm going to keep it in feet, or I'll give you the new equation, it's negative 16t squared. All right, plus
256.
we changed our velocity. It's 272. T. In problem 34, we're doing problem 34. And then plus,
0.
yep, because why?
It's ground height.
Because we're at ground level. Remember, if we were standing on a 100-foot cliff, it would be plus 100, right? Okay, but it's not. It's plus 0. When will the height above the ground be 960? When will the height be 960? There are 2 variables in that equation, S and T. What does S stand for? Height. Height. What does T stand for? Time. When will the height be 960? What are you going to do with that 960? Where does it go? Reagan?
Set it equal to the equation.
It goes in for S because that's a height. So 960 equals negative 16t squared plus 272t. What kind of an equation is that? Quadratic. You're going to get it set equal to 0. You do not have to, but I always like, if I can, to divide out this coefficient. You do not have to do that. But, is that divisible by 16?
It's 272.
Oh, it's 272, thank you. Is that divisible by 16?
Yes.
Okay, so that's t squared minus 17t plus
60.
60. Now, at this point, I wouldn't complete the square on it because when I take half of 17, it's going to be a fraction, so I don't want to do that. But you could use the quadratic formula, or if you notice, this one does factor. Now on test day, I don't want you sitting there for 10 minutes trying to figure out how to factor something. if you can see how it factors, and this one's easy, no. I said it was easy, but it's not. How about that? Is that better? Then I want you to factor it. But if you can't see how it factors, you could use the quadratic formula on that pretty easily. So what does that tell me? T equals 12 or 5. So when is the ball 960 feet above the ground? After 5 seconds, and again after 12. So in terms of a diagram, here's the ball. Here's the height of 960. Right there it's at 960, and right there it's at 960. So that's 5, and that's 12. That makes sense to everybody? On the way up, on the way down. Now, when will the height above the ground be more than 960? Well, if you look at the picture, that's pretty easy, isn't it? When is it higher than 960? Right here, right? So we would say between, what? 5 and 12. Now, was your question, Robert, should these be or equal to's?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, because it says more than 960. Now, if it said at least 960, then we would want to include those endpoints.
Okay.
When will it be less than 960? Now, this is what we talked about yesterday. The temptation is to say t is less than 5 or t is greater than 12. That's when it would be less than, right? But what's wrong with that? We talked about it yesterday. Hannah?
have like negative.
Exactly. So we got to cut this one off at 0. And we got to cut this one off at, when's it going to hit the ground out here?
17.
And you know it's going to hit the ground at 17 because why?
Because like parabolas are symmetric, and so if it took 5 seconds to get to the height, then it's going to take 5 more seconds.
There you go, to get down. Any question about that? All right, anybody else have a question about a homework problem?
Number 5.
Number 5. Oh, wow. Okay, let's look at that one. Now, did you know how to start? Did you know the very first thing to do? Don't even say that. Look at that problem. What do you think you need to do to get started?
I added 2
Yeah,
to the other
yeah,
side.
that's what you do. You add 2 to the other side. So now it looks like this. Now, here's what I want you to think about for a minute. Okay? When we take the absolute value, are these two things equal to each other when I take the absolute value? Yeah, because the order of the subtraction, one of them would be positive, one of them will be negative, but as long as you're taking the absolute value, it doesn't matter, right? So that equation bothers me. To me, it looks backwards. But since it's inside absolute value, I'm allowed to turn it around because it's inside absolute value. You kind of see that? Now, you know, I'm going to do this problem on the number line. I'm going to think of this as a distance, but the 3 is bothering me. So I'm going to divide it out. And my new inequality looks like the distance between x and 4/3 is less than 2. So here's 4/3. Now I'm going to go 6/3 both ways. So 6/3 this way would put me at 10/3. And 6/3 this way would put me at -2/3. And again, see, that makes perfectly good sense to me because I interpret this as the distance between x and 4/3. That's what that says to me. So here's 4/3. I just go 2 units that way and 2 units that way. And I want to be in between. So my answer is everything between -2/3 and 10/3.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Bailey? X squared minus 8x plus 16 less than 0. Okay, Yesterday we did a couple of examples, Bailey, of quadratic inequalities, which is what this one is. Is it minus 8x?
Yeah.
Plus 16 less than 0. And how did we start our quadratic inequalities? We factored. So this one factors like that. Now this is different than yesterday, because yesterday I had 2 dots that I put on my number line. This time I have 2 parentheses, but they give me the same dot, right? So I'm only going to have 1 dot on the number line, which means I only have 2 sections to check. So I'm going to pick a number over here, like maybe 0. 0 would give me negative times negative. Is that the outcome that I was hoping for? No, because this is negative, and that would be positive, right? I want a negative output, so this didn't work. Now, I'm just going to check this region, because this problem's a little unusual. It's not normal. The factors are the same. So I'm going to try 5. What happens when I put in 5? I get a positive outcome, which still doesn't work, does it? So what's the answer to this question? There is no solution to this problem. Now, Bailey, if you think about it for a second, that makes sense, because what's another way of writing this? X minus 4 squared less than 0. Now wait a minute. What do you know about squared things? They're always positive. Can a squared thing be less than 0? No. So that's why there's no solution. Now, turn it around. What's going to happen there? I'm going to color this and this. Right? So that would be everything except that open dot right there. If I put this in there, it would be everything. That would be all real numbers. Okay, an example of a weird problem. All right, who else had a question about a homework problem? Jamie?
Sorry. Number 15.
15. All right, what bothered you about that?
Well, I didn't know if you could take the X out and then.
Now, Jamie, what do you mean you didn't know if you could take the X out? You can always take the X out. They both have an X, which they do. So what happened when you took the X out? You can factor that. That's called the difference of squares. And how does that factor, Jamie? Do you remember?
X minus 1.
Yep. So there you go. You're factored. Just exactly like Bailey was, you are factored. Your thing, though, is, now how many factors do you have?
3.
So you're going to have 3 dots on your number line. And where are those 3 dots going to be? Where do we put it when there's no number hooked to it? What? Yeah, you do. What's added or subtracted to that? Nothing. So how do we express nothing? So you got 1 at 0, you've got 1 at positive 1, and you've got 1 at negative 1. Every X has to have a dot on the number line. If there's nothing added or subtracted from it, then it's just at 0. Now, there's nothing odd about these. There's no duplicates, no squaring, nothing weird about those. So I'm going to pick one number, maybe 10, and I'm going to put it in. 10 would be positive, positive, positive. Does that give me, when I multiply those, does that give me what I wanted? It does. So that section of the number line works, which means this section won't, and this section will, and this section won't. So my answer is everything between -1 and 0, or everything bigger than 1. All right, who else? Oh, there has to be something. There's nothing else. Bailey? All right, what'd you do with number 9?
Well, I was trying to plug it into my calculator, but it didn't say the full graphic, so I got
Well, 9 says use algebra. So what would that mean? And in reality, you could do it on your calculator, but it does say use algebra. So if we're following the directions, that would mean do what Jamie did over here, which was what? What's all this that she did? What is that? That's factoring. You need to factor that guy. Oh Lord, it's got a leading coefficient. That always freaks us out. We don't need to be freaked out. 2x and x, plus and plus. That part's guaranteed. There are no other choices. When you FOIL this, you have to get a 2x squared. Everything is positive, so you've got to be all positives. Now, all I need to do is find a combination of numbers that multiply to give me 21. There aren't many. 3 and 7. And then I'm going to see if I have them in the right order, because could it have been 7 and 3? It could be. I don't, well, let me just leave that and see. When I FOIL, what are my outsides and my insides add up to? 6 and 7. Is that what I want? Nope, so let's try the other order the way I had it first. Let's put 7 there and 3 there. What does that give me? 14 and 3. Is that what I wanted? So there are my factors. So I draw my handy dandy number line, and where do the dots go on the number line? There's only 2 of them. Where do they go? -3/2 and -7. All right, now listen, the worksheet that I gave you is pretty big, okay? I don't want you to stay up all night doing it. I want you to give me 45 minutes on that worksheet, okay? If you get it done, great. If you don't get it done, you will have to finish it another time. But 45 minutes of honest effort, all right?
Just tell her you don't know if you'll use
Tyler,
it.
you need to get this down.